Bjørn Ekeberg, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
I think you've got the most eclectic background of anyone I've ever had the privilege to record a podcast with. You've written books, you've written screenplays, you've studied the infinite space of the universe and cosmology, and now you're in the red light, in near infrared light wellness space, or I guess health tech space. How did your previous life in cosmology prepare your mind for what you do now in the wellness space?
Well, it was certainly not a straight linear path of ambition where I set out to do what I'm currently doing. Sometimes life takes you on strange sort of side roads, and then it all starts making sense when you start looking back. I think for me, about 12 years of higher education and years working on a doctoral project that turned into a book on the metaphysics of physics and cosmology. It prepared me in the general sense of I had a researcher degree and deep investigative kind of background. So when I, many years later, it was around the time actually when my book was finally published after going through the sort of the academic mill that took a few years. I met two of my co-founders of the current business I'm running with Red Light Therapy, and there was something that clicked in when I realized the sort of the paradigm shifting implications of this technology, if it's made generally available, I think resonated with me because of my background. Philosophy of science was sort of the key area I studied and contributed to, and sometimes I'm in festivals in the UK debating on stage like questions around how do we know things around physics and cosmology, Big Bang Theory, these kinds of things. So it may seem very far off, but then it started making sense on a couple of levels. The research side, and then also, of course, the much bigger picture of the cosmos, sunlight, what is energy, what is red and near infrared light, etc. So in the very big picture, there was a clear connection.
Beautiful. Well, I think that the best place to start is to ask you, what is energy?
That's a great question. Energy is one of those things that is a given. It's a condition, and we just know how to measure it, so to speak. So I could ask the question back to you: what is electricity?
Electricity is a type of energy.
Yeah, it's a type of energy. And where does it come from? How do we have electricity? Well, we don't really know. Like we've become really good. I mean, in the 1800s, we figured out how to harness it and measure it and then funnel it in through copper wires, etc. We learned to deal with it somehow and make more out of it. It's a little bit similar thing with energy. I think it's just the absolute given of the world. Physics can give you all kinds of equations on it, but it can never tell you what energy is, or actually what light is, which is very similar. You could argue that energy or light is energy. Really, if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum and how light travels in space, you could overlap the two and say they come from the same thing. But here too, physics only gives you kind of quantified answers and can work with the equations, but it cannot tell you what it actually is. But that it's a given of our life, and we're talking about cosmic energy traveling through light, hitting our little bubble here on planet Earth. All of the energy that comes from the sun is all the energy as we know it. I mean, we tend to think of energy as like, a cereal box converted into calories and foods, etc. But all of our foods that we eat to get energy all get their energy from the sun, and we actually get directly energy from the sun as well, which is a broad spectrum energy.
I think that's what the number one thing I've learned through this podcast is looking at humans as not to look at humans as separate from our world, as we're completely part of it. And then when you view humans as we're part of the world, you realize that the first, as you put, first principles thinking, the sun is the start of most energy on Earth, almost all energy on Earth, right? And so why should we be any different? I know you were, or I've read you were skeptical about red and near infrared light when you first came across it, but now you're an advocate. What was the piece of information that changed it?
I think it was actually trying it and becoming more comfortable with it. I wasn't skeptical of the phenomenon as such. What I saw documented when I met my co-founders, and one of them is a medical doctor who's worked on clinical research on this for decades, and two of my co-founders were really deep into solar cell technologies, electronic devices, hardware making, and they had come across the research, PubMed literature, NASA's work in developing prototypes of this, showing that near infrared light has a physiological impact on the body. If you're exposed to it, certain dosages and certain wavelengths, something happens. So I wasn't really skeptical of the research that I saw, but initially it is this hard to believe kind of thing, because some of the benefits and the effects of it, that I'm sure we get more into, are quite astounding. And so my first initial skepticism as well, if this is so great, why haven't we heard of this before? Or why is this not a thing that everybody has at home? That's how this whole thing got started. And then I started also realizing that it's not in everybody's home because the products aren't quite there yet. And it's not, that there's a reason why people are not using it at home yet. But now increasingly they are. And I think that the shift is coming, that it's something that if you can just develop in the right form that people find irresistible, and they can take on themselves, and they can get to understand it properly, how it works, I think this is going to be mainstream very soon.
I agree with you. I do find it funny though, because my partner, who also produces this podcast, we live in our own little health bubble, right? We speak to brilliant people like you all the time, and we're sort of it's our everyday. And so we go to friends' dinner parties, and they're very politely ask about the podcast, and they say like, oh, what's been interesting recently? And without fail, every time I mention light, and you get near infrared light from the sun is full of different spectrums of wavelengths you can't see, and you keep going for about 30 seconds. They're looking at you just like, you're that guy, you're the quack. I'm like, no, I'm not. Maybe I am, but you've got to listen to the science of it. And I think it does take a little bit of buy-in for the general public to view the body as some sort of semiconductor in a way, and that we need these different spectrums of light. So before we get into the different spectrums of light, could you explain to us what near infrared light is versus red light and other spectrums people might have heard of?
Yeah, so if you think of the energy that comes from the sun, it's complete. There's a full spectrum, which encompasses way more than we can see. So if you actually take the visible light on the spectrum from blue, green, and red light within that spectrum that we think is what we see, it is just a tiny fraction of all the different kinds of radiation, electromagnetic frequencies that exist in the universe. So you have things like gamma rays in the extreme that physics is after on one end, like microwaves, etc. But you have a big spectrum called ultraviolet, or UV, which is associated with some of the harmful and also positive sides of the sun. And then there's a huge part of the spectrum that's called infrared. And infrared is right where red light ends and tilts into the invisible. So if you look at a sunrise or a sunset, it tends to be red. It's because it is always red because the light or the energy shifts toward that part of the spectrum. The feeling you get if you look at the sun or that sunset, that warming glow that it has, that's the closest you get to. That's infrared. Infrared is associated with heat. And it's actually over 50% of the energy we get on Earth that reflect around us is in the infrared range. So it's a very, very large invisible part of the spectrum. And within infrared, there are several bandwidths that have kind of different impact on us. You will find probably many of your listeners will have tried an infrared sauna or have heard of one. That is usually in the so-called far infrared range. It means the wavelengths are very, very long. And those wavelengths interact with the skin in a way that induces sweat. So you get very, very hot actually at the skin level, and it can be more effective in inducing sweat than a regular heat sauna. So when we're talking about near infrared, it's not the same as an infrared sauna. Near infrared is the closest part of the bandwidth to red light, and it has a wavelength that's just long enough to be able to penetrate your skin. And that is a crucial factor. I mean, I think in a way that's the magic of near-infrared light. Why it works this way is that it's able to go through the skin, through and into muscular tissue.
So, okay, so when it comes to the implications of why the fact that it can penetrate the skin, why is that important?
It is, we have started to realize because there is a reaction at the cellular level to being exposed to this kind of light. So that's why it's now kind of thought of as the healing frequency or the healing bandwidth of the visible spectrum of, or the invisible spectrum of light. It's because something happens at the cellular level when it's exposed to light between 800 nanometers to about 950. There's a physiological response, and what appears to happen is the mitochondria in your cells generate more energy, and actually in some studies we can talk about indicate that you can produce more mitochondria. So like there's mitochondrial biogenesis that you normally only see in connection with exercise and certain kinds of activities like that. You can also achieve with near infrared light. So it's this connection with mitochondria that's the core mechanism. And then researchers have identified a whole set of sort of cascading effects from that in the body, like circulatory effects, improvement of oxygen in the blood. Basically, that's one way you can measure effect of red light therapy. So overall, a lot of physiological health benefits from exposure to this light. That's the research since the 60s, 70s is when the first connection was established. This has now been elaborated in quite a lot of studies, and it is, to go back to your original question, one of those head scratchers, as in like, how can this be? And that's also where I started when I first was confronted with this research. It's like, what? How does this make sense? But when you think about all the energy we do get from the sun, it sort of makes sense if you think that part of your sun exposure is the sun doesn't just tan your skin. Some of that energy, when you're out for, let's say, an hour without any clothes, some of that actually goes through the skin and puts you in a kind of a healing response in the body. So, yeah.
It's a kind of profound mental leap, because I think for people for hearing something like this for the first time, they think, okay, well, the sun isn't just tanning my skin, as you put it, it's actually healing me and healing my mitochondria, and I've heard of the mitochondria, something to do with the powerhouse of the cell, right? And I think the next corollary to that is, if I believe that, then okay, how can I just get I need to get in the sun as much as I can. Where's the place for devices in this?
Well, I mean, if you're in the sun all the time, you're also going to get probably harmful radiation, UV, etc., because the sun is complete in its own way, and there are various ways in which we should not be in the sun all the time, right? So near infrared is that particular bandwidth. We've isolated it, basically. It's a concentrated form of the healing part of the sunshine in one device, right? And that's in a nutshell what red light therapy is.
Okay,
so you can get similar effects from being out in the sun over a long time, but in a concentrated, targeted form. And also, given our relatively modern lifestyles of not really being so much out in the sun, it can be an amazing complement to anything that you do health-wise.
We speak with a lot of experts in various different fields, and we had the privilege of speaking with Dr. Roger Schwelt, who is very bullish on near-infrared light and different spectrums of light from the sun. And I'm always curious, because cancer rates are skyrocketing, diabetes rates are skyrocketing, health on average is getting worse across the globe, right? And different people peg it on different problems. Some people think it's big food, some people think it's the vaccine, some people think it's this, some people think it's a confluence of things. But I got the impression from Roger Schwelt that it was, he told us that 92% of our lives we spend inside or in a car, and so we're deficient in this near infrared light. What do you think about the sort of on a global scale? Do you think we're deficient in these spectrums of light?
I mean, it depends a bit on where we live, but generally speaking, yes, I profoundly think so. And I think that especially if you live in an urban environment and if you live, spend a lot of your time indoors, you may see the sunlight through glass, but you're not getting any of that near infrared. I don't know if you've ever seen like infrared cameras that you can use, like what it looks like when you can see the world through an infrared camera. You can see if you take it through a park, for example, or like out in nature, you will see infrared, and specifically near infrared, is reflected everywhere because nature then reflects that light, so that even just a brisk walk through the park, even if you're in the shade and you're not tanning, like you're still getting all that ambient infrared. Is just part of what makes nature feel good, if you will. Right. Whereas if you do the same camera in an urban environment, it is completely absorbed by asphalt and by concrete. Right.
That makes
so
a lot of
there's
sense.
a lot that we miss out on in our modern life, and there are also reasons why we can't be in the sun for 6 hours of the day. Not to even mention winter, which is a phenomenon that we know where we live.
Weirdly, it's sunny now for this for this hour, which is kind of, I don't know if you can see me very well, but usually it's not sunny here.
Sorry? Yeah, it's a beautiful light.
It is, yeah, it's nice, but usually we don't have this in the UK at all, so it's pretty dim and dismal. The interesting, what's the relationship with a leaf and near infrared light?
A leaf?
Yeah, like leaves from the trees and how it absorbs infrared and reflects it more than other things in nature, I've heard. So about your comment on the near infrared photography, apparently green leafy things absorb and radiate it even more. So if you were to sit under a tree, for example, you're being pummeled by this near infrared light.
Yeah, well, it is not then direct near infrared light exposure in the same way, so it wouldn't replace necessarily a red light therapy panel, but that you say you're in an ambient surrounding where all of that energy is still reflected, so you are still getting some of it in a general way.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I want to shift gears to mitochondria specifically.
Yeah.
Why are mitochondria so important, and why do they need this kind of light? What does the light do to it mechanistically?
I mean, mechanistically, what has been established is that they respond to this light. It's almost like a stressor, right? It's like a hormetic stress response at the cellular level to produce more energy within the cell. So there are ways to measure like ATP increase, etc., and efficiency and functionality of mitochondria. This is a science, by the way, that is in full, that's fully forging ahead. I think we're going to see a lot more interesting sciences now. We are developing tests that are actually able to assess this properly. So far, we've been going a lot with indicative references that show establish the relationship. But I think we'll soon be able to actually measure the mitochondria, like count the numbers and the growth and all of this stuff that has been established via biomarkers and indirectly and so on. So I think it's a very interesting time for research and science into this field.
Because currently we can't do that, right? We can't currently measure the amount of mitochondria we have without taking like a muscle biopsy. Is that correct?
That's also my understanding, is if you want to count your mitochondria, you are relying on a biopsy and then math, sort of. But you can measure things indicatively, like VO2 max, I think is now generally established as at least a reference indicator that there is a relationship. If you increase your VO2 max, generally means that you have more mitochondria, right? You had a very interesting guest on your show a little while back, a medical doctor who talked in depth about this particular, established this difference between mitochondrial efficiency versus just mitochondrial mass as a whole, and the human ability to do through exercise or specific activities, you can actually increase the number of mitochondria. You could like drastically improve the whole mass of your body that is made up of mitochondria. And that is unlike anything else that we know in the human body, that we're able to do that.
Yeah, it's so simple as well. I mean, I remember it was Dr. Mark Talvanovsky, and I was saying, how can we make our mitochondria better? He was like, nah, you can do that, or you can just do exercise and you can double the capacity in 6 weeks. I'm like, okay, very good. That's interesting. And I wanted to ask him about red light. We didn't get around to it, but what does I guess going back to it, how does the near infrared or red light make the mitochondria better, or in any way?
Well, this is an interesting question, right? It's like, how does it actually, because we see, we measure the effects in terms of downstream, in terms of benefits, and then and so on. But when there are a few studies, and I think there's going to be a lot more, but that show mitochondrial biogenesis, as it's called, that it's actually generating more mitochondria. This is a research question we post internally as well, is this treatment that's clearly working when you look at the use cases, that people are getting something out of it at the end? Is it because the mitochondria become more efficient, or is it because you're actually growing mitochondria? So there are some studies, I'm happy to link to them for your listeners as well, that indicate the latter, right? That it has the capacity to actually increase your number of mitochondria, or the mass of mitochondria in your body.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, we'll put them in the show notes for sure. So, okay, so we started energy. We've zoomed slightly into different spectrums of light. Now let's get to we've gone to mitochondria. Now let's get to the sort of practical applications of what use cases can you see in day-to-day life. I know there's a lot of applications in pain management and injury. What stories have you seen with pain management injury, and how effective can that be?
Yeah, I mean, we can start with pain management and injury to start somewhere, but this is honestly one of the biggest obstacles or challenges we've had since starting this, is how to address the whole range of different benefits that you can have with, the right dosage of light, the right power, etc. It can yield so many different beneficial effects in the body that it then boggles the mind and is almost too much. And so it almost is hard to believe, right? It is not to say that it magically works for anything, anytime, and just shine it for 5 minutes and you are cured of whatever it is that you're ailing you. But it's been established for pain, inflammation are of course key, but for muscle repair, and that can go muscle and tissue repair. If you have a light that can go deep enough into the body, you can reach into joints and ligaments, and it can promote bone healing. Like muscle repair, muscle recovery, and muscle performance, some of the most studied things in large randomized controlled trials with control groups, etc. On athletes, for example. Like there are many studies that show dramatic improvement in performance, actually, as a consequence of quicker recovery time. And I'm often asked to quantify it, like how much, right? And all the studies we're looking at, like how many more percent do you get faster recovery, or how much inflammation reduction, etc. And it's of course hard to quantify for any individual because we're all different and all cases are different. But when you look at the research literature overall and all the different overlapping quantifications that have been done around it, it indicates that something like muscle recovery, for example, can be 30% faster recovery from like a pulled muscle. Inflammation reduction is in the range from 20 to 50%. Pain reduction can be from 50 to 80%. On the performance level, it's 10 to 20 to 25%. These are consistent numbers coming out of the studies, right? And some of them are on hospitals and mobility and ill patients. But I think some of the more arresting studies that we found are the most interesting ones are done on professional athletes, like VO2 max, for example. Recent study of footballers, I think they were in the UK, actually, like high level, large study broke down all the VO2 parameters. This is including the time limit of exercise and the different sub parameters for establishing VO2 max, from 5 and 8% to 20% to 25% on each parameter. So overall, like hugely statistically significant improvement in VO2 max when it was used consistently over time against control groups. So sometimes I'm amazed that this is not a bigger deal. Also in the athletic world, we have a lot of sports stars actually have invested into our company and are ambassadors for us that use this. For them, it's the targeted injury type, like the practicality of it. But these numbers are so that it's not just for regular, like for athletes who would happily do anything if you can improve your margin by a few percentage points.
Absolutely.
But for the average group of people, if you can shave off a whole day of recovery from any kind of issue, or to improve your recovery means then improve performance.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I've long had this belief that whatever the athletes start doing, it trickles down to the general population. And VO2 max used to be, I mean, 15, 20 years ago, it was this elite cyclist pro sport metric, and now it's what's the number one metric you can focus on for your longevity, right? And I think your health, I mean, a lot of our listeners are pretty health conscious. They're very focused on a VO2 max, and I hadn't heard that study. That's so interesting. I'd love to just bounce back and forth on how you think that works. Do you think that's due to the mitochondrial benefit of it? Do you think that's the sort of mechanism at play?
It seems the most plausible explanation, but the studies can't show that. Right?
Yes.
So studies can show the effects, etc. And Mark Tarnowski that you had on the show, he was also he was quite firm about that being the strongest indicator that you have for anything you can quantify. So roughly speaking, if you increase your VO2 max, that's not really possible without there being some sort of mitochondrial biogenesis happening, right? So again, it's by 1 degree of difference that you can read the effects.
Yes.
Now there are developed more like actual mitochondrial test kits stuff are starting to come out on the market. So again, I expect us to be able to do more data. Like, I mean, you could be an N=1 kind of, you could run the test on yourself and actually get that data, right, in a way that wasn't accessible before.
God, that would be a very big inflection point for the industry as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Massive. The Glenn Jeffries came on the show, and he's done wonderful studies showing the glucose response with in bees and then in humans off a red light, which I'm sure you've seen before. But he also said something quite interesting about the mitochondria, which was it's so hard and complicated. It's almost like this little black box. You can sort of see what happens before and after, and you can go into the weeds of it, but actually it's not as productive. You just want to see what sort of happens. So from the point of an athletic point of view, okay, we've got injury, we've got recovery, it can penetrate the tissue, we've got VO2 max. What about neurological applications and on the brain? Is there any scope for that?
There's a lot of research around brain, like the gut-brain axis and impact on the brain, like cognitive function and red light. There's a lot of companies that are specializing in this now to try to develop something for the brain. I know some of the first devices out on the market, a little bit hokey for now, but it's that is coming more and more, but it's more complex around the brain, right? So this is one of the reasons with our device FlexBeam, we'll talk about in a minute. It's like curved for the whole body. The only place we say you probably shouldn't use it is on the brain or on the head, because you need very specific dosage for the brain. I mean, the brain is an electromagnetic giant field, right? It's very different from the rest of your body this way in terms of activity. So I know that there's some of the more interesting research I often get asked about is about eyesight, about brain, cognitive function. There's huge potential for it to offset Alzheimer's, for example. But all of that requires, I think, a lot more research and more precision before we have sort of commercial applications that we can say, now you can safely just put a helmet on your head and become smarter, or anything like this.
Well, I think it's super important, and you the CEO of a company that sells this stuff, but you're not leaning into the puffery that is seen sometimes of it's your be all and end all cure for everything. And actually, I think the slight price you pay by doing what you're doing is it's an emerging field, so you're innovating as the research is catching up, right? And I think you've been very transparent about what the research actually says, as opposed to overly hyping it at all, which is very credible to you. What applications of light as a tool in this way are you most excited about over the next decade or so?
Well, if I think broadly, I actually think what we talked about, the cognitive effects of this, are really, really very promising. But I do think the missing link for the brain and cognitive function is like what we're increasingly becoming aware of goes through your gut. And like being able to influence or positively reinforce your like the mitochondria and light receptors and your microbiome and everything with light is probably one of the most powerful applications that we've come across. We didn't design the device for this originally because it's more toward targeted injuries, etc. And then we started getting reports and experimental user feedback with data showing impact on for people using it on their stomach, on the gut, for example. And that also had cognitive effects. So I think central nervous system type responses and things that go through the core of your body, I think we're going to see a lot more both research and specific applications for that.
The gut-brain axis is such a, again, it's a mental leap, isn't it? Like
Yep.
there will probably be a study somewhere showing that if you were to use a near-infrared light panel or device on your gut, it would have some effect on your brain, right? But you know, as and when that comes out, it's super interesting. Tell us how the business came about. How did Recharge Health as a whole? How was it born?
Well, when I met my co-founders I alluded to in the beginning, I knew two of them from before, and they were deeply into like making hardware, like that was their expertise. And they had just like they're making solar cell lamps and these kinds of things. And they had come across the research, and they teamed up with a medical doctor who has a clinic in the UK and who's been working with lasers and various form like modalities like neurostim, etc. Like lots of things that are for the longest time were considered alternative and holistic and all kinds of strange things, and are now actually starting to get more substantiated, I think, among a general audience. But she had a dream that this is the kind of technology that everybody should have at home. And why do not people have it at home? We were kind of a little bit outraged when we learned about the potential here and to see that why isn't it there already? And I can tell you this was like 6 years ago. Already then, myself, I fell into the biohacking bucket in 2014, and I've been sort of following the health space a little bit for over a decade. I could see that there was a growing awareness around red light therapy in that space for people who are really into health, and that the only thing that really existed that had sufficient power to be able to make a difference was like panels. And that's still, I think, the predominant way that you can get red light therapy now, and most people use it, is a stationary panel you can hang on the wall or put in front of you. So what we realized, or our hypothesis, is that that's not a very effective way to do the treatment. That is more effective if you can place it straight on the skin. You're not losing any light. I mean, imagine you're standing 6 inches away from a panel, and I don't know, you have one of those yourself. I don't know what the recommended distance is, because you can't stick your face up to it, right? Or your body.
Yeah, you can't. I think the wavelengths are 800 and 650 or something like that. But yeah, I have your sort of standard panel,
Yep.
and it's a limiting shape for sure. It's kind of annoying sometimes.
And it's the distance is key, right? So because you have to, it has the blast energy, and you have to be at a distance from it safely. But already when you're 6 inches away from the panel, you lost something like 85% of the output.
Oh,
Like,
really?
it's not like the light travels. Like if you see this thing where people put a red light in a room or something, and somehow you can do it while exercise, like really, it's just, if you just regard the physics of it with any kind of seriousness, it's not possible that it can work. You have to have a pretty consistent dosage, like a power output that actually makes that treatment effective. Otherwise, the light will not penetrate properly. So just being in an ambient surrounding by an infrared bulb, maybe it's nice for your mood or something. And of course, it could have nice effect on your skin if you're just like if it's radiating around. But what you're looking for is near infrared light actually penetrating your cells, like muscle tissue, joints, etc. And then a much smarter way to do it is to be able to put it straight on your body, right? That's a more effective way of delivering it. So that's how we started. We saw that there's nobody doing this, and We designed it from scratch so that it would curve around the body. You can use it anywhere, but without any sort of lost emissions, and just effectively where it's needed.
Yeah, I
And I
think.
think, yeah,
Sorry, I was just going to say for someone who's listening audibly, if you can visualize a red light panel as a panel that's very inflexible, flex beam, if trying to describe it, you can wrap it around a limb, for example, right?
yeah,
And if you've got it on the video, you're very kindly holding it up.
yeah. It's been described by some people as like an ammo belt looking
Oh
like
yeah,
shape, kind of. It's got light pods that are connected around a very flexible strap skit type belt, so you can place it anywhere on your body. Comes with straps if you want to fasten it if you need to. But it will fit around the small of your back, for example, and then cover your whole lower back area. It can curve, like it can completely treat around the knee or an elbow joint or over a shoulder. And when light comes from different angles, you imagine the light is actually penetrating, we're talking 3 inches, depending a little bit about what's sort of in the way, if it's bone or tissue, etc. But it can go quite deep. And that way you can actually treat, let's say, into a knee post-surgery, or an elbow joint, a tennis elbow, for example.
Mm.
Like you can get light from different angles and actually get quite deep treatment with it. So therefore, like the design, the form factor, and the power of the device is crucial to get results.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm curious to use it. Where do you find people are concerned with it? I mean, do you get concerns of, is it safe if I put it near an organ? How do you deal with
Yeah, those are among the long list of typical, like the only sort of caveats we have around safety. And it's overall is a very safe and researched technology, right? So there's really no contraindications other than very specific cases. Then sometimes we get questions about, let's say, testosterone use. Can I put it on my balls? Can
Yeah.
I use it here around organs, etc.? So our doctor co-founder who has developed over 150 different protocols now, which is like basically placement guidelines to try to help people with specific issues like how long to use it and so on. There are some organs like this where it's good to reduce exposure because it may be too much for a gland, for example. You don't need a full 10 minutes, which is what the program usually runs for. You may only need 2-3 minutes, like lower dosage.
Right.
Those are very specific points on the whole, on your whole, like anywhere on your body. You can safely use it 10-20 minutes a day. Some of her protocols are 30-40 minutes if you need to treat multiple places. But then you get a real systemic boost along with the local targeted application as well.
Okay, brilliant. And are your customers mostly athletes? Are they using it for sports purposes? What's the main reason someone would want to buy it?
It is honestly, it's so broad. We are mostly focused on athletes as a way to help validate and bring awareness to this for everyone. In the UK, many of your listeners may be familiar with the captain of Arsenal, Martin Ødegaard, who is one of the Norwegian superstars in football. He invested into the company when he first got one because he thought this is brilliant for his use, because it's always issues are around hip and knee and very targeted spots. So in the sports field, that's let's say one core of our audience. But we actually find the biggest audience we currently have and the most sort of traction and interest is around what the bubble that you live in health optimization. I would say there's a growing number of people who are just genuinely interested in ways to improve their health. They may identify as biohackers, but I think more broadly, maybe not. That it's just about learning the tips and tricks and new insights from the science to put them into practice. This is an enormously growing field. Like more and more people are sort of jumping on the bandwagon. You could say that it's like that. I think that you've been in for a while.
Well, a little bit, yeah. It's as a view, right? I mean, it was fringe 10 years ago, and now it's much more commonplace. Speaking of fringe, you mentioned the testosterone benefits. Very interesting how this whole thing came about. And my understanding is there's one 1920s study that shows that sunlight onto the testicles will boost testosterone and other hormones via backdoor pathway essentially. And then it got all the rage of the panels boosting testosterone.
Mhm.
And I've got some interesting views on this. What do you think about this?
Well, tell me what your interesting view is.
Well, I'd maybe caveat that. I don't know if it's interesting, but I think it's interesting. My view is I actually think it could be a really good candidate for some men, and I don't think it's a one size fits all approach.
Mhm.
However, I think if you have a slight, I'm fascinated by endocrinology and male hormonal optimization. I think if there is a candidate or a male who has a testosterone problem at the axis of the testicle, be it a varicocele or poor circulation, I think the near infrared light could really help that,
Mhm.
specifically with reducing reactive oxygen species in the testicle. But that's not every guy, right? That's just if
No.
there's a problem at the axis. So that's my view. I don't know if it's interesting, but that's what I think.
I mean, it's quite similar to how Dr. Zulia Frost's protocol for testosterone support that we have tried
Oh,
out, like
really?
tested and have use cases that show before and after, etc., that show an improvement. But it is then, I would say, for most men, it is more about just general exposure to near infrared is still going to have beneficial systemic effects, and that you don't necessarily, in most cases, need to treat locally in order to see improvement in testosterone. I think you can get that more sort of generally, just as like HRV is another biomarker that we can show over time increases. These are all parts of improved mitochondrial function will have these kinds of specific effects, right?
Mm.
So yes, if you have a testosterone problem or like really, really low count, this can help along with other things in a very, but then, following very specific guidelines. On
Wow.
the whole, I think just like being in the sun, I haven't myself measured testosterone before and after the summer, but I mean, you can certainly feel the difference if you get more sunlight exposure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think every guy can relate to that after going on holiday, right? So you mentioned the tests you're doing internally. Tell us more about those tests, and maybe is there a few in particular you're excited by, or
I mean, it's all the time actually. Like users come back to us showing their they're tracking themselves on an Aura device or a Garmin watch or something, and um, showing progress in one particular area. I think for us when we started, we're a group of nerds. I have a philosophy of science background, but a medical doctor plus a sort of engineering mind on physics. We founded this on really belief in the core scientific principles of how to make the most effective treatment and to be able to get that to people. However, we never had a rich uncle or a big venture capital firm backing us from the start or anything. And doing research at the level that makes like any sort of doctor working in a hospital like stand up and say, okay, now it's definitive. Like these kinds of levels of studies, like meta studies with thousands of people, we've yet to see them in this field, right? And they are very costly. I think there's more than enough research in this field to clearly establish patterns, especially when you look at what users are saying on top. But to get to that pharmaceutical level of like multiple trials and stuff, I think that's always been hard for
yeah?
any kind of one company to be able to do at scale. So what we set out to do is to try to collect the user feedback and systematize it. And now we are running our own experiments. We have a handball club in Norway that we are now partnering with to measure them for an extended period of time on 20 different biomarkers using this. And all that data we want to just publish and share, right? It's part of an ongoing study. And hopefully it will be published and go through that like as a scientific paper. But just being transparent, I think, in this day and age, when people sit on data themselves and they're making their own n=1 kind of rationale and conclusions, if you can systematize that and get that into a broader framework, it can be helpful for other users to see data points, etc. I think what I'm trying to say is I think science can be done differently now, and you can still get very credible results without necessarily having to put up $2 million for a traditional type of study.
Hey, I completely agree, and I think the especially over the last 5 years, this shift away from studies to, well, has it been replicated among, a number of people? Yes, okay, and I think that your general person is taking note of that, and I think that cold exposure is a really good example of that, right?
Mhm.
Cold exposure has not a lot of good research at all. I mean, the researcher, I love making this point. Wim Hof has a load of brown fat, right? But
Mhm.
he's also got a twin brother who has more brown fat than him, who doesn't like cold. So, and anybody's like, oh, it's amazing for brown fat, and it probably does, right? But the research is lagging behind the claims being touted, and it doesn't stop the people feeling good after cold exposure. People convinced that it actually is really good for your hormonal system, all sorts of things. And it's become more N of one as opposed to you have to wait till the study comes
Yeah,
out.
and and often those studies is like kind of arcane rules, large sizes, needs a lot of funding, etc. And so there's a huge gap between what you can clearly see and get data on, and for it to be sort of formally approved by an institutional body that says it satisfied all the parameters or all the check marks of research at that level. And I think in that gap, that's where the interesting stuff is happening around health and all the new science.
Yeah, I completely
Uh,
agree.
so one of our super users and recent partners in this endeavor is a biohacker called Brian Johnson. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean he's now rising to fame. I think he is very good at making headlines for his experimental approach to longevity. But he is, just as an example, he's very interesting in that he's very aware of this gap, and that's what he is really aiming to bridge in a way. He's testing it on himself, but in order to raise awareness about the possibilities that we all have as humans, like he's kind of forging the road ahead by publishing all the data on himself
Mm.
and just saying that openly and egging other people on to try to compete with him and share their data, etc., as a way to get to broader recognition of the best science out there that's not yet formalized in that meta clinical trial.
Mm.
And I think it's a very interesting approach. He's
I
of course using a lot more money than you and I have to spend
100%.
on it.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, I think it's funny. I think the fact that it's sort of open source aging now, I
Yep.
think that's the biggest inflection point in this space in the last while. I think because it unlocks so much potential across all sorts of different brands and products and advocacy. And I know lots of healthy people, and I'm sure you do as well in the biohacking space. Yes, they'll read the research, but if something's working for more than one person they trust, admire, and respect, they're going to
Yep.
do it and they're going to try it. So long as the downside is capped, right, and it's safe.
Yep.
And yeah, people like Brian Johnson definitely push the boundaries of it, and they're brilliant marketers as well. But you can pick and choose which bits you want to try and emulate for yourself.
Yeah,
So
and I don't think that he is not doing this in order for everybody to copy him and do exactly what he is doing. He's on his own kind of mission just to chart a course, so to speak. Right?
absolutely, yeah.
So
So I'd love to know more because you must practice what you preach, right? Maybe an interesting place to start would be in the last 10 or 5 years, are there any health protocols, tools, you name it, that have made a meaningful impact for your health?
besides FlexBeam as the most effective red light therapy, you mean?
Yes, exactly. Besides FlexBeam is the most effective red light therapy, of course.
For me, I developed a sort of a keto-oriented approach. Like I went ketogenic in 2014, so on, and tried that out, and with intermittent fasting as a way to trigger ketosis and changing my whole conception around fats and what, like that was the biggest game changer for me 10 years ago, because I was always interested in health, that I thought I was living healthy and I was following like the multigrain kind of approach and soy milk when I thought dairy milk was bad. I was always sort of living healthy, but realizing the impact of fat specifically and getting clarity on that changed a lot of things around nutrition for me. And then I found as sort of the first couple of years of that were more stringent. I would say maybe 6 to 12 months in which I was like super strict and went through that whole thing of cutting back and only this and no, I can't eat that because it's garbage. etc. And then as my body adapted to, I found now I don't even think about it. So now I'm what I think the American Ben Asadi calls it keto flex, that your body develops the ability to, I can eat carbs too, etc. But it was a kind of a training for my body to have a different metabolic response. Means I can go in and out of that more freely. So I'm not always in ketosis or always ketogenic, but for my body to learn that was really, for me, the biggest game changer.
Yeah, I have a very similar experience with that, and I think I don't know what where you think man's default state is meant to be from our evolutionary past. Always in ketosis, metabolically flexible. But
Mm-hmm.
my personal opinion is we're meant to be dipping in and out of it more often than not, I think.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who's curious by that and maybe ears would prick up at what I just said, I'd say maybe try it and see how good you feel, because it is night and day, for at least personally. Another interesting one as well is when people in ketosis, their C-reactive protein, and which is a level of inflammation in the blood, for people who are not aware, it basically goes to zero, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just I don't know if you've had that much experience with sort of the change in your blood work going to keto, or
No, with keto, I mostly use the urine strips and
okay.
these kinds of things to get a general sense, not so much blood. But what did you find?
My C-reactive protein goes basically to zero.
Mm-hmm.
My free testosterone dips a little bit because the rise in SHGB, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not a bad thing. I think you can just focus more on getting your total higher, which means in net you'd be about the same. So just be a little bit more diligent. My brain works infinitely better when I'm in ketosis.
Yeah.
But the problem is the modern day world doesn't want you to be in ketosis. You know, I go into London for like a day of meetings or something. It's hard. Not impossible, but it's hard. So yeah, very, very bullish on metabolic health in general, and keto for sure. Another one is I'd love to ask you, because you have such an eclectic background, is what important truth do you believe that very few people agree with you on?
That is such a question. It's very eclectic. It comes out of my work from philosophy. But I believe the future is something that's already existing and that we are pulled toward it. So that our ideas and the intuitions we can have, if you have a vision of something, we are sort of taught to think that we are living in the present and guided by a past, and that any thought you have that makes you think, oh, I'm going to start a red light company, or I'm going to do this, it's something that you consciously then put yourself into action. So I believe that it's actually you are hearing the future and you're drawn toward it, that the future is a magnetic kind of property we're always going toward. So that if you are visionary, you are literally just tuning into what is in the future. So you are doing those things not from ambition and I want to go there linearly and I want to achieve this, but you're literally doing what the future is asking you to do if you're open to it.
What an answer. I think that's one of the best we've had. How did you come to that conclusion?
This through my years of philosophical speculation and reading a lot about time and the three. It's a book I would like to write one day that I don't have time for right now. But it's a third conception of time, and is not entirely taken out of just out of thin air. It's actually an implication of the so-called block universe. That is it's a derivation of the Einsteinian view of the universe. Is that the past and the future and all different states, they actually do exist in a mathematical sense, right? So it just that it hasn't happened yet, but the future is real and we are drawn toward it. So I suppose it's a speculation from that.
Wow. And how does that affect your relationship with intuition?
It makes me even more mindful of it, and I try to let my intuition guide me as much as possible. Also, in my work as CEO of the company, I rely a lot on analysis and having the rational frameworks around. But all of the bigger decisions have to go through intuition for me.
Hmm. Well, that's very top of mind for me at the moment. So I'm very pleased I asked that question. Beautiful answer. Um, do you have any books you can recommend? You know, you've got a very interesting worldview. They could be about health. They could be about life, what do you enjoy reading?
Of current books, I recently finished a brilliant book by a UK journalist called, what is it called? Substance. It's about the 6 most important materials in the world, and it's kind of an investigation of sand and salt and copper and iron, oil and gas and lithium, which sounds maybe boring, but it is a really eye-opening book into the politics and economics of the present, and that the race for these minerals, that basically our whole world would fall apart if we don't have access to them, that I found to be the most interesting read I've had in the last year.
Beautiful. Okay, cool. We'll put it in the show notes for sure. And Bjørn, I could speak to you all day. You're a fascinating man. Where can we find you? Where can we keep up with your work? Obviously, recharge.health is the website. We'll make sure we've got that in the show notes. But where can we keep up with you?
You can also, if you're on LinkedIn, I post there frequently. I'm being asked by my team to be on all possible social media channels, which I don't really have time for. But I have a LinkedIn profile, and I encourage all your listeners, if you want to learn more around red light therapy and specifically how it can work for you, recharge.health is a good starting point. We have loads of scientific studies. It's its own section where we link to the original source material. And of course, that's also where you can buy and try out for yourself a FlexBeam, which is a wearable red light therapy device that packs the power of a panel into a wearable belt, basically. And we are working on getting future iterations and to advance innovation in the space. So very happy for any of your followers that want to pay attention to that space and what we're doing in coming years.
Beautiful. Well, look, honestly, I've learned so much and really enjoyed talking to you. So thank you so much for coming on. And
thanks for having me, Ben. It's great talking to you.